Welcome to today's Software AG webcast titled ARIS 10, Managing Process Landscapes. Today's webcast will be presented by Dr. Simon Olberding, ARIS Product Manager at Software AG. As we move through today's presentation, I invite you to submit any questions that you may have via the Q&A box, which is located in the top right corner of your webcast dashboard. We will address your questions at the end of today's program. In the event that we're not able to answer your question, your submission will be recorded, and today's presenter will be back in touch with you as soon as possible. Additionally, today's presentation is being recorded. This program recording will be available on the ARIS playlist of the Software AG YouTube channel later today. Before I turn today's presentation over to Simon, I would like to briefly introduce you to Software AG. Software AG helps companies with their digital transformation. With Software AG's digital business platform, companies can better interact with their customers and bring them on new digital journeys, promote unique value propositions, and create new business opportunities. In the Internet of Things market, Software AG enables enterprises to integrate, connect, and manage IoT components, as well as analyze data and predict future events based on artificial intelligence. The digital business platform is built on decades of uncompromising software development, IT experience, and technological leadership. Software AG has more than 4,500 employees, is active in 70 countries, and had revenues of €879 million in 2017. With that, it is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Simon Olberding.
Thanks so much, Will. A welcome also from my side. It's really exciting being here talking today about managing process landscapes. So as said, my name is Simon Olberding. I'm working in the product management of ARIS, and one of the products I manage is ARIS Process Governance. And this is what we are going to talk about today intensively. And so we're going to walk through a couple of slides and then also go into the tool, but I would really encourage and invite you to ask questions, to actively participate in this webcast, making it much more interactive. So managing process landscapes. So in this webcast, you're going to learn really why managing the process landscape is really an integral part activity for coping with a changing environment that I think we are all in. You can see in this cast how automated workflows become of a tremendous importance in addressing this change. So automation really plays a huge role here. And then we're going to look into the tools. We're going to leave PowerPoint for a moment and really learn about the 4 pillars that define ARIS Process Governance. So we're going to look into the runtime or the process execution environment that end users are facing most of the time. So that's actually the 90% case of interactions between the users and ARIS Process Governance. Then we are looking really under the hood. We're looking into the design environment a little bit. So how these workflows that we are talking about and what they are, how they're actually designed, how this works. We're going to look into monitoring of the degree of change in the company that can be derived by the amount of workflows that are currently running. And lastly, we're looking a little bit into the administration of the workflows, which is also an important topic. Okay, but let's start first. I think you can agree companies have often many processes, and they range different EPC models that you could have. You could have BPMN models, and often so we ask a lot of customers, and often they have between 1,000 to 5,000 processes in the company. So that's really a lot of processes, each with individual steps, with an individual logic to it. So managing this process landscape becomes really critical. But why? Why actually is it so important to be able to manage this big amount of processes? So the reason is that there are several challenges in the business process management, and they all relate to change, the change of the environment. And we have here 4 categories of change, but I'm sure you can also think of even more of these categories. And I just want to highlight out a few of them. One of them is about law and regulations. So often companies, they have to stay compliant to laws, fulfill guarantees. They have compliance requirements that they have to even report to. They need to manage their risks and have internal controls, and their processes need to stay according to these laws and regulations, which are also changing. So then we have, from a customer perspective, we have this big topic of customer experience management, which is of a tremendous importance for many companies. And as you might know, customer experience really is just another point of view on processes. You look from the outside of all these processes from a customer perspective, and so they also affect the process landscape. So they need to change the processes in order to be to deliver this sort of customer experience. Then there are changing requirements on the product and service quality. Response and delivery times are also changing, and we see also a higher degree of individualization, particularly in digital areas. Then we have information and technology trends. So see, there are many disruptive technologies coming up at the moment. IT security is changing, particularly there are often more and more security standards, but also changing requirements, and also IT standardization, which is an ongoing topic, but particularly in the digital transformation in which companies are in, this also plays a big role. And the last category that we address is the free market economy. So, and you can think of the competition is changing, so you might have to change as well. Corporations between companies change internal processes. Consolidation changes the process landscape. And also the speed of innovation is just an additional factor showing how volatile and dynamic the landscape is. So, and just a few to make it even more a bit tangible, you can think of a risk and compliance manager asking, how can I ensure a reliable and non-manipulated definition of my test cases and risk assessments? ARIS architect might say, how can I support the standardization process of my IT architecture? The process analyst might say, how can I guarantee that only those processes are rolled out which work best for all stakeholders? And the ERP project leader might say, how can I ensure a tight integration between my SAP systems, my business processes, not only during the project, but also in the future, after I'll go live for testing, training, continuous rollout, etc. So it's about change. And now we have these 2 perspectives side by side. We see on the left side that large organizations, they just have BPM processes that have a high complexity, and there are numerous of them. There are high degrees of stakeholders, there are iterations, organizational changes, and so on. And in the right side, we see that organizations really must fulfill the laws, meet compliance requirements, want to manage risk, maintain higher product and service quality, low response and delivery times. So all these aspects. And so in the middle, you can see there's really a need for governance in order to be able to fulfill these, both of them, coping with the reality of the complexity and on the other hand, also fulfilling all these requirements and coping with all the change. So, and the question is, do we really need now an automatic approach? Does it really need to be a workflow? Can we do this just manually? Yeah. And so let's give you an example of the manual approach. So imagine, so here's just one workflow as an example to illustrate whether you can do this manually or not. So you see this workflow that you see here is about creating a new process and publishing it to all employees. And it's a bit simplified, but you can see we have different roles. We have a process analyst, designing a new process, a reviewer that executes a formal or content review. We have a process owner that approves, rejects new processes, and we have staff that are trained according to new processes and live them, and there are many of them. So, and now we can imagine that the process analysts, they design a new process and they send a draft maybe by mail or by any sort of communication system that's available in the company to a reviewer. This reviewer reviews it, looks at it, and maybe sends it back, or say asking for more details here and there. But eventually the reviewer will approve it, which then goes to the process owner. He also reviews it and then say approves it or rejects it. So, and all this communication is mostly happening by any sort of email in a bit more ad hoc fashion. The last step is the process owner approves it, and then it gets somehow rolled out to all the staff members. Often, if the process is designed and reviewed, and maybe all the employees they might have such suggestions for changing it, so they provide feedback to the process owner, and then the cycle continues. And all this is handled somehow informally by mail. Just imagine this. So what could possibly go wrong in this manual approach? Well, it's quite a lot. So first of all, no formal responsibilities are actually defined. I defined them here in this example, but in the company reality, it's not always so clear who's the reviewer, who is the analyst, who's doing what, who is the recipient of, a draft of a process. So it's not formally defined. Then also no substitution is defined. So for example, what happens if the process owner is just not available? What happens to this entire cycle of creating a new process if it's not possible to officially define a substitution and to communicate it as well? Then the entire process is not documented. So now I just pointed out the approving of the process owner to the staff, but actually it's true for the entire process. So there's no documentation. It's you cannot in the end really show in an audit trail that everything works as defined. So then it's also really error prone and efficient. So if you have these, so in this example, we have maybe staff members, they communicate back to the process owner. As this is not clearly defined, it's going to be a lot of information flowing from A to B, has to be managed, and often this goes wrong if this is not clearly defined. And the entire information flow in this process actually is really built for being errorless, as there's so much information flowing and it's not really clear what sort of information needs to flow. Then there's actually a high effort for every participant in this process to learn it. Learning this entire process. So everybody has to learn this process, and often it's not the only process in the company that you have to remember. So imagine yourself remembering, say, realistically 5 to 10 or 10 of these processes with different participants in each of the process, and usually they are much more complex than this simple one, which is really just for illustrating purposes. So this really does not work at scale. And this also directly results in all these undefinitions result in long cycle times, as there's often this confusion and misunderstandings that might be within this naive or this manual approach. So how to do this better? How to do this better? So better is using the ARIS Process Governance, because it automates these workflows. So how does this work? You see there's a green arrow on top now, and this is a clearly defined workflow for this particular process. So the workflow really ensures that you have clear formal responsibilities, it's well documented, there's substitution management inside, it cannot be manipulated, and it could also track exactly each activity of every participant in the process, and it requires little training because nobody really needs to know the entire process, you just need to participate in it. So, and you see each of these the persons that we had, they're participating now in this process and interacting with this. So, and this has these huge advantages. So, but this was just one of these examples that you could do with ARIS Process Governance. So you could as well have many more application areas. So, for example, you could perform requirements management with ARIS Process Governance. So where you have a requester that places a requirement, this is then submitted to a demand manager that evaluates and suggested requirement and triggers the required actions. Then you have a responsible person that, say, realizes all these requirements or rejects them, maybe involving additional people for advice. And lastly, you have the staff that provide additional information. But you could also look at a more continuous improvement process where you have a requester that suggests an improvement. You have a process owner that evaluates these suggested improvements and triggers actions. Then you have a responsible person realizing improvements or rejects suggestion or involving additional people for advice. And lastly, you have the staff that provides additional information. Yeah, and if you look at then, and you're going to see later on in this webcast, the flexibility of the ARIS Process Governance, which really, is a real highlight in this product. As we know, there are so many application areas that you could use a workflow for. We ship also reference content, and these touch some of the really popular processes in which this is actually, in which you really need these workflows. Yeah, so for example, in the modeling processes, you need a release cycle management. So a mechanism that automatically manage the release of new process, the update of process landscapes, for example, that does it. And usually they can be quite complex, involving many databases, having a staging concept. We ain't going to touch this in this webcast as this goes a bit too deep, but if you're interested, really let me know. We can dive into this deeper. Analysis workflows, audit trailing workflows, make sure that everything is recorded, that actions are recorded, check out, check in processes. Then we also look at changing process. For example, how to continuously improve the process landscapes, which is really critical in order to have your process landscape as close to the reality as possible. And in order to do this, you really need the involvement of every employee in the company that is able to submit their changes, their ideas in order to make the landscape even better. Yeah, demand management, position change management, policy management. And lastly, we have BPM service center processes, configuration, evaluation, request management. Just some example that helps you get started. So now with this, we're really leaving now PowerPoint, and we have a close look into the tools. So there's going to be a live demo of ARIS Process Governance, and we're going to look into 4 areas. And these are really the 4, say, pillars of process governance. And they're really just examples in order to illustrate on how process governance works. So first of all, we're going to look into the execution of workflows. So this is the area that many employees going in touch. That's the surface of ARIS Process Governance, and we're going to walk through this by showing you our continuous improvement process that directly ships with ARIS. So then we are going to look under the hood. So this is going to be a little bit technical, but I really want to show you how a workflow can be designed with ARIS Process Governance. And I want to point out a little bit the differences maybe here and there of a traditional business process and a workflow. And so we're going to have a little look on what's going on below the surface. Then we're going to look at a monitoring environment for ARIS Process Governance, which is based on the product ARIS Aware. And monitoring change is tremendous important because these governance, these processes that manage the process, or these workflows, they indicate the dynamics of the process landscape. So, and if you're on a transformation project and you want to see on how you want to be aware of the degree of change, it's really helpful to have these, to monitor these, but it's actually also really helpful, this is a more practical thing, to see where some processes may be stuck and who you have to remind to do his job. And lastly, we're going to look a little bit at the administration of workflows. But this is just going to be shortly looking at this because it's important. These workflows essentially are little programs running in ARIS, and you have to see, like in the Windows Task Manager, what sort of applications are actually currently, what sort of workflows are actually currently running in the system, what the status, check who hasn't responded, but also having these important features like archiving workflows that are actually completed, that run through to keep the system nice and clean. Okay, let's start with the execution environment. So what you see here, I'm loading here again. It is now really a live demo. What you see here is ARIS Connect. ARIS Connect is the front end of ARIS for every employee. So it's the way every employee can access the process landscape. And I'm logged in as an artificial user called Steven Staff. He works in sales and is not responsible for a process, but he's executing a process. And this is his personal environment. So, and just to give you a little bit background, Steven is working in the United Motor Groups. And as I'm clicking here, the United Motor Groups is a company that we from ARIS, we just made up to illustrate, so to provide some content to actually illustrate the capabilities that we have with ARIS. So United Motor Groups doesn't really exist, we just made it up. Steven was working in the United Motor Groups, and what you see here is actually this sort of entry point for the process landscape. So you see all sort of groups of processes right here. So, but as Steven is usually just involved in a couple of these processes, he usually is not navigating through the entire process landscape. He just goes to his favorites, and one of them is the sales order processing. So this is what Steven is working on, and you see this is one of the fact sheets. You see Otto Owner is actually responsible for this. So, and this is something Steven is executing. Here you see the formal process that Steven is executing as a regional sales administrator. So usually he doesn't take this, he doesn't look at this particularly technical diagram in which you have process steps and you have some rules, these logical rules. He usually just goes through this by the steps view. That's something we provide. It's uniquely in ARIS Connect that provides a very, very simple way of navigating through the process. So, but actually this webcast is not about ARIS Connect, it's about ARIS Process Governance. But you see ARIS Process Governance really connects all the dots here together. So what Stephen is doing, he is usually really executing this process step quite often, and he found out that in order to, in the sales order process, so that's a process that's executing after a car is sold from the United Motor Groups, there needs to be some work done. One of them is check sales, contracts, and documents, just a process step. And what Stephen realized that he can optimize the step because he created a checklist. So now he wants to improve the process. How is he doing this? So what we have here on the top is a direct button for submitting a change request. Yeah, if he clicks at this, so a change request is initialized in which he can send a request for changing the progress. So he just says, oh, maybe add a checklist. He put the description, so saying I created a checklist to execute the step check sales, contract, and document. So, and he's also said this is also used by my many of my colleagues, and it really works well. Yeah, so maybe we can attach it to the process. So that's his. So that's what he's writing. He says, okay, well, the priority it's not low, but also not mission critical, and he has a checklist here. He created it. He just drags and drops it on it, and then it's attached in the change request. So then he submits it. Gets an information, your change request has been sent successfully, perfect, great. So now Stephen is actually done, so he provided feedback for this particular process. And now we have to switch roles, which is really important because this, as said, ARIS Process Governance touches multiple persons. We log out and log in. We're going to log in. And now we logged in as auto owner. So he's actually the process owner. So he's responsible for this process, and if he checks at the tasks, he sees, oh, he got a new task. A change request for model. Just check it out. Look at it and says, oh, okay, Steve, I know Stephen. He added a checklist, created a checklist, executes check sales. Perfect. Great. That's a good idea. He checks the list and so on and says, okay, well, just approve it. Yeah. And then in this demo case, he also gets the assignment for realizing the change, but he says, oh no, this is something I don't do. Let's forward this to Annika. Annika, who is doing the process modeling, he delegates the task, so it's really easy to do, and says, okay, well, perfect, I'm done. And if we look now at Annika, so we're going to log out. And we're going to look at her tasks. You see, oh, okay, perfect. Realizing the change request. Okay, so Stephen sent it. I got it delegated. And she can directly, and this is really nice, she can directly go now into ARIS Connect, directly in the link Connect Designer, which is our web-based design environment. Yeah, so it's completely web-based. You can model in the web. It has a rich set of functionalities, and you can directly do all these changes here. So we ain't going to go through this now, as this is beyond the scope of our webcast, but I think you get the idea. So it's very well integrated. It's completely bulletproof. So there is no missing information. Workflows are clearly defined. And say, the big advantage of the ARIS Process Governance. Okay, good. So I'm now closing this and say, okay, well, assuming that you did all these changes now, and we're going to finish this task. Okay, so that's the, if you're going to go back to the slides, we see this is really about the executing workflow. So you can think of this is one really simple workflow, but now we're going to look under the hood and you can see you're going to realize that you can do workflows of any complexity here. And now we're switching to the design environment. So now it's getting a bit technical, but I really want to show you the openness and flexibility of ARIS Process Governance. So what you see here is actually the exact workflow that we went through in the last example, in which, say, an improvement suggestion was submitted, then was Otto who reviews it, and then they delegate this to Annika, who realizes the change. And you can see the entire workflow here, and it looks really similar, like a business process. And in fact, it's really, the logic follows really closely to the EPC. So you have the same, really the same notation, but it's a bit different though. It's a bit different because you have because in a workflow, you do not only have a logical flow, for example, where you say a change request is triggered, a question, are documents attached? Well, documents are attached, say in this case, and then you create a folder somewhere in the document storage, you move some documents and later on retrieve a number of attached documents and so on. So, which is a more logical flow, but what is necessary in order to automate things is to have a data flow as well. And this is actually where process governance, what you don't see here currently. So now for this process step, I open the data flow and don't be overwhelmed of this image that you see here on the lower left. Because what you see here is you have to imagine that with ARIS Process Governance, you're really writing, technically you're writing programs, but on the level of abstraction, it's really just putting things together. So it's not programming. Yeah. So what you see here is you really connect a data source to a data sink, if you want. So you're really connecting data. You're really building the data flows quite visually here. Actually, you can think of this as pipes of data that flow from this side into that side. And what you see in the middle are operators, so to manipulate the data. And we have really simple operators for common usage, but also quite sophisticated operators for more demanding applications. In addition, in order to add to the flexibility of ARIS Process Governance, we also offer rich ways of doing, say, computations. So by having pre-built web services, say, creating folders, moving documents, nothing you have to program, just things that you have to put together. So you don't have to think about really the programmatic logic. However, if you have a really demanding applications and familiar with programming, of course, you can even go down this route and really write programs here if you have this sort of demanding application, but it's not necessary. Okay, this is just a very quick view under the hood of APG. So you see, if you scroll down a little bit, you see it's very familiar. You have, just to point this out, you have roles, you have functions, you have events that are triggering functions, and so on. And in the end, you also have maybe something you ask, okay, well, it doesn't look really visual, like we saw dialogues where all the dialogues. We have a built-in dialogue designer, so you can design these dialogues here. So if I would look into this, then you would enter the dialogue designer, and you can design any sort of custom dialogues with the controls you know that you know of web applications. Yeah, so text fields, drop downs, and you name it. Okay, so this is just a quick view under the hood of ARIS Process Governance. So now let's talk a little bit about monitoring change. Yeah, So imagine having a lot of workflows in the system at a particular time. You want to see the degree of completeness of these workflows, not from a technical side, but from a business side. Yeah, you want to see what processes, what groups are changing rapidly, what are not changing rapidly, and luckily, now I'm logging out again. We have a component. We have a pre-built dashboards for this that you see here. So you're going to look, so you're on the start page, you look in the dashboards, and you can see here dashboards that monitor the process change management. And so, for example, you can see the status of change requests, excuse me, for models. So how many are completed, how many are pending. Here are a lot of them pending at the moment. The number of change requests, so you see the dynamics really of your process landscape here. You have a model change request over time, so to get the temporal dimension into this. You see also which processes are actually very changing a lot, yeah, or where you have a lot of demand for change. Here we see some examples. So each bar represents one process, and here on the axis you have the number of change requests. And then you see also the model owners. So often in the end it boils down to individual persons that you might need to ask, and that they have to report and can you tell you more about the current situation of the process landscape. So in here you have an overview of the model owners with a change request, and you can even go down more into the details where you see for individual change requests, and you see the individual steps and so on and so on. So you can dive to any degree, and also this component that the product ARIS aware and on top of which this is built is also highly flexible. So in case some information is missing, you can even add your own dashboards. One really important point I want to highlight is the human task management. So what's a human task, first of all? What's a human task? So every time somebody in the company has to interact with your workflow, he gets a task, as you saw. So you have to approve something, you can reject things. So every time you open this dialog, that's a human task. And these are really important because otherwise the workflow would run completely automatically. Yeah, there's no human involvement. But often it's important to see who is involved in order in the end to remind them. Yeah. So there are rich ways of filtering and specifying what you're actually looking for, because usually you deal with a lot of these requests. So it's important to maybe say, okay, well, I want to specify a date, a task, a context, and so on. So this is all possible. Okay. So lastly, going back to the slides. So we looked at the monitoring aspect. Now we're going to take a small view into the administration of workflows. Maybe this sounds a bit dry. Administration is maybe not for everyone, but it's tremendously important because, as said, you have these workflow instances. They are often written by the customer itself, and so while we're trying everything to prevent users from writing workflows that maybe slow down systems and so on, sometimes it's really something that that you want to do. You have a workflow that does something that's computational a little bit heavy or involves a lot of persons and so on, and you need to know how these workflow instances actually perform. So, and what you do here, you go to the ARIS administration. So now we are we are administrators. You go to the ARIS, the process administration, and now you get, it's a bit more technical view. So for example, you see all the processes that are actually deployed to the system, all the workflows that we have here. You can see all human tasks that are here, and you can really now. I'm sorry. And what you see here really is this one here. These four, these one here are really the ones that we just triggered. So you can really see each individual step, each human task. You can see each human task here. But if you want to look even technically deeper, you can go to the instances. Instances, you can think of this as one workflow that's executed. So and here you see every detailed step that's happening. Okay, and lastly, we also offer now with the latest release the possibility to archive all these workflows that just ran through, so that are completed, that fulfilled, that worked out, and now you can put them all into archive in order to keep the system clean and to increase its performance. Of course, you can also trigger this archiving automatically. You do not have to do this manually. Okay. So with this, so now I gave you a complete tour of ARIS Process Governance, ranging from the execution of workflows into the design environment. We had really a short view on how does actually workflows look under the hood. And the argument really, they look very similar to EPCs, but of course they have a data flow that you need to model as well. Then we're going to we looked a little bit into the monitoring aspect on seeing how much dynamics are in the process landscape. And lastly, a short view in the administration of workflows. Okay, and with this, I really want to conclude and then open up for questions. So the message is really you can automate it, BPM governance workflows, really in a model-driven approach. For example, release cycle management tremendously helps there. You can establish enterprise-wide BPM policies, roles, and responsibility. ARIS Process Governance is highly flexible and open. And it also works in large-scale scenarios in which you have a lot of these workflows running at the same time. So imagine many employees triggering continuous, like a workflow saying, I want to improve something. They all do it at the same time. Or think of something different in which you want to release a new version of your process landscape. And before you have a lot of workflow steps in order to come to a coherent picture. So these things, they work with ARIS Process Governance. Okay. So, and with this, I'm open for questions, answers, and I want to thank you a lot for listening. So now I'm handing back to Will.
Great. Okay, Simon, thank you. Got a bunch of them. Some were simple, I think, and some were a little bit more detailed. So we're going to start off with simple, and maybe it's not so simple. How long does it typically take to implement ARIS into a customer's system from first conversion to being up and running?
So this is a question I think you cannot answer in general, because it really depends on the company and the customer and the use cases you want to build. So maybe we can take this offline for this particular case. Maybe but it's I cannot really answer this in general. Yeah. Also, the ARIS Process Governance workflows, you saw the degree, maybe the requirements you have changed. The requirements you have changed the degree of complexity of the workflow. Yeah. Maybe, did this help already? Otherwise,
yeah, I've made a note that we'll be in touch with the questioner directly on that.
Okay, perfect.
So, yeah, next one. How are customers charged for ARIS? Is there an ongoing license fee, or is it usage-based, etc.?
So it's not usage-based. So we have licenses both for, say, servers and for clients. So, for example, in order to access this viewer that you saw, in which Stephen's staff was looking at processes, we have licenses for them, but also for just getting for the server that handles everything as well. But we can also go into more details. So this would be a separate section about how licensing works exactly for all these different processes. But in general, it's like we have different products like ARIS Process Governance or ARIS Connect Viewer and ARIS Aware, and you can assemble them.
Okay, I have a quick question that came in peripherally that said, do you mean SR6 as the latest release?
Yes, yes, SR6 is the latest release.
Perfect. Okay, good. We were able to get that simple question knocked off. All right, here's the next one. You may have been addressing this towards the end, but I'm going to pose it to you anyway. You mentioned policy management in ARIS governance. Can you talk about how to use ARIS to ensure a process change request complies with policy?
Yeah, so you can really build these workflow and ensure that, say, policies are considered, that you can when you change a process, say, you have to consider several policies, you have to go through this, and process governance walks you through this way. So this is, for example, something in which these workflows would really help to not miss anything. Yeah.
Okay. Next one. Sorry, I was just pulling it up as you were answering. Question is, we are on ARIS 9.8. How different is the APG within the ARIS 10 environments?
Oh, okay. So as mentioned in ARIS, so there are several things. So first of all, so you saw, for example, things like archiving, which is tremendous important for some of our customers, is included. We did lots of performance improvements under the hood. So APG runs can say handle heavy loads and runs fast. So these are sort of things we did, and we also improved the user experience of APG by, for example, directly integrating the process board. So this is the overview of tasks that you have, and we integrated this directly into ARIS Connect, as we think that it's an integral part just of working with processes. So it needs to be in a single application, and also improved user experience of some forms. Yeah, but we can also go into more details later on. But this is roughly what just pops up in my head when I think of this question. Yeah.
Next one. If I want to use ARIS Process Governance, does Software AG support me with example workflows to quickly get me up to speed?
Yes, absolutely. So as you saw, it's always handy to have some examples. Yeah, and we provide some workflows that you can just use as examples, and or customize them a little bit to your needs, and it tremendously helps in building the workflows your company needs.
Okay. Another I have, how big is the difference between a regular business model and an APG process?
Yeah. So the APG process, they mostly differ in the sense that you have to think of the automation that also going on, which is not in a regular business process. It's really a description on how things are connected together. But the workflow really has this data component built into this, Yeah, so it really is executable in the sense that it's just really a program that's running, although it doesn't look like a program. So you have to have this data flow that you need to model as well. But as said, is really like connecting little pipes together through which the data flows.
Okay, I was on mute. I apologize. Should have probably asked this question prior to the last one, but I'll ask it to you. Can APG handle the demands of large enterprises?
Yeah, so we did lots of improvements there to have APG coping with really demands of really big enterprises and really large scenarios. And we have 10,000s of workflows running. Of course, this always depends on the complexity of each individual workflow that you model. So, but from the experience we have, we can really say we can handle them.
Okay. The next I have, what is the typical size of the business that finds this offering a good return on investment?
It's a good question. So it's a good question. So you can just calculate the amount of time you would need to manually execute a certain process, or with the process governance, because you save tremendous amount of coordination about misunderstandings, so all these aspects. But we can say that at least medium-sized, big companies, large companies, of course, yes. Medium companies, also yes, because they also already have too many business processes running that need to be managed. The process landscape is already too big as you can do this without managing. So this is what I would say. I think a really small company probably would even benefit from this as well. But it depends really on the definition of, so like maybe a startup could handle this still without it, but medium-sized companies, of course, they do. Yeah.
Okay. Making sure that I'm not on mute. Okay. Can you release more than one process at once, or is it one by one with a single mail?
Release one by one. So I do not really get the question right, I think. Maybe the submitter could write a little bit more in this. So executing a process one by one, so you can have a workflow and lots of employees in the company. They submit or change or do something with this workflow. So yeah, there are many of them running in parallel, if you want so. Yeah, so that's of course possible. So if we have Steven's staff and lots of his colleagues, and they would all submit something, they would all execute a workflow, that's possible. Yeah, but I don't know if this answers really the question. Yeah.
The questioner came back and said, for example, a process owner has 100 processes to release. Does he get 100 mail or one mail?
So for every, I think this also depends on the workflow design, on how you build this. But for every, say, change that you submit, you would get. So in this example that I showed you, you would get a mail for this. But it also depends on the process design and how you can aggregate things there. Yeah.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a notation to that questioner. And Simon, I'll send that to you, and you can reach out to that person just to make sure that they're fully clear. As a backup to the ROI, the questioner came back and asked, with regard to even small companies, and they're asking, so even companies over 10 million revenue as well would benefit. You're saying yes?
Yeah. Yes,
okay.
I would say yes, they would benefit. Absolutely.
All right, good. All right, forgive me because the good news is that people are now writing. The bad news is that they're coming in a little tiny window. So forgive me. Let me just pull this one up. It's okay. It's all right. We like questions at any cost. Next one. Is it possible to create a change request not for one model but for model lists at the same time? Does that question make sense?
Yes. I also would like to follow up on this to be really clear. I do think you can do requests for a couple of them. However, common is really to have requests, say, more one by one. That's what we observe. Yeah.
Okay. Forgive me again. I'm just making notes about us wanting to follow up on various things. Okay. So we're good. Okay. Another one I have. Is the dashboard that was shown part of ARIS 10, or is it a separate product?
So it's a good question. So this is a separate product that so working with ARIS 10, so it's our dashboarding environment. So you call it ARIS Aware, so which can be purchased separately. Yeah. So it's not so if you just buy ARIS and do not include ARIS Aware, you will not have these dashboards.
Okay. I'm going to get you one more.
Okay.
Once installed, how long in terms of years have you found that customers will typically stay with ARIS?
Oh, that's so we have many customers that are with us for a long time, and that we have close and really great successful relationships with and support them. So often we have long-term relationships with customers. So and we also have many customers. Yeah. So that's they stay usually with ARIS for a long time.
Okay, perfect. So to the two questioners that we said we'll be back in touch with, Simon will be back in touch with you once he gets your information from me, which will be about half an hour after we end the program today. So as a reminder to everybody that is with us this morning, first of all, this morning in New York, this afternoon in Europe, thank you for joining us. Our next program is on October 30th. It's ARIS 10, how you can achieve an enterprise-wide rollout for your digital transformation. If you've not yet joined the registration list for that, I invite you to do that today before you forget about it. And that program, again, will take place on October 30th at 2 p.m. CET. So with that, Simon, thank you so much for what was a very interesting and detailed presentation. Our program has now ended. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.